Studios have been producing games that appear derived out of pure self-indulgence, ignoring what players actually want to play games for, and instead releasing title after title, all in the name of narrative creativity and trying to emulate the storytelling that Hollywood does. But by doing this, they've completely missed the point. Gaming is not movies, and it's costing publishers an absolute fortune. So as you're probably aware, Xbox have been taking the axe to a bunch of studios recently. And the two most notable ones, of course, are Double Fine and Ninja Theory. The latter, of course, being responsible for the Senua games that started in 2017. So if you haven't played Senua before, Hellblade is a series of games where the protagonist is suffering from psychosis and a mental disorder, hoping to resurrect her lover from hell, basically. And playing the first game, which I have played, it's very a walk simulator, especially probably the first hour or so, right up to get up to Helheim's Gates. You essentially row a canoe for 5 minutes through, and this is a very good looking world and it is deeply atmospheric, but you're rowing a canoe for about 5 minutes with voices whispering all to you about what I presume is a schizophrenic psychosis attack. Then you get off and you walk through for another probably 15 to 20 minutes while you solve a puzzle at a gate before you finally get to fight a few sort of otherworldly beings as part of the end of the tutorial, which actually tells you nothing about how to play the game. Now, I understand that this has its appeal. To me, I didn't find it particularly interesting or unsettling. I haven't fully finished the game, although I will finish it for the purposes of being able to have a valid opinion on this. Now, Senua 2 leaned into that narrative aspect way harder than Senua 1 did, but the first game still did have things like fighting multiple enemies, puzzles were a bit harder and more abstract, and those sorts of things, whereas Ninja Theory wanted to lean far more into the narrative storytelling side in the second game, and they ended up removing a lot of the combat and difficulty out of that, as well as simplifying the puzzles. Now, what this ended up turning an already narrative-heavy game that was, in some aspects, divisive due to lean into the storytelling, much like The Last of Us, which is also critically acclaimed and sold a bunch of copies, mind you. But it leaned way too far heavily into that aspect, and people went right off the game. Now, of course, as you're possibly aware, a couple of weeks ago, they announced Senua 3, and 9 days later, the studio was essentially told they were closing down by Xbox. There's some theories behind potentially the showcase was to show it off to potential new buyers and who might want to buy Ninja Theory as a studio and continue selling Hellblade or continue developing Hellblade to sell it. The original had about 5,500 Steam users and then about less than 4,000 for Hellblade 2. Now, obviously, they had a lot more players than that because they had, I think, day one release on Xbox Game Pass, which obviously tanked the sales for Senua 2 because it was a $50 game, and if people were really that desperate to play it, well, they could have just signed up for Xbox at the time. For $15, played the 7-hour walking simulator game and unsigned or cancelled their subscription to Xbox Game Pass. So a bit of an own goal there from Xbox in that regard, but this probably highlights a bigger problem rather than just Xbox and Ninja Theory with Senua itself. The point is here, that games like this, they do have an audience. So it's wrong to say that gaming companies and studios should never make games like this. There's absolutely people out there that want to play this kind of game. So these games are very craft-driven. Obviously, Senua as well is gorgeous. It's extremely well produced. And if you like these narrative story-driven games, you'd probably love the first one. Again, not so much the second one. A lot of people who did enjoy the first one didn't enjoy the second one, but due to removing further gameplay aspects from actually playing the game itself, which makes it a really weird point to me is if you're going to make a game, make a game. Don't make a story, don't make a TV show, don't make a movie. That's not what people play games for, because there is Netflix for that, there is the cinema for that, there is countless subscription services that you can watch a movie or TV on that's going to suit you in that mood in that moment, and gaming isn't one of those things that people sit down to play games for because they want to chill out on the couch and watch a movie. And this, of course, is further to the point where the whole window dressing theme that I mentioned earlier has become an industry-wide problem. There's always been criticism in gaming of studios focusing too much on the wrong thing. Essentially, making a game boils down to some pretty basic stuff. You create a core gameplay loop, you test it. If it's fun, you expand the system, but you stay true to your core gameplay loop, because that's what makes a game fun to play and what brings players in. If you consider a game like Brotato, for instance, what's the core gameplay there? Get more guns, shoot aliens, live as long as you can. Pretty simple stuff. And you look at all the other bullet hell games, Vampire Survivors, Halls of Torment, all pretty similar, but they have a very addictive gameplay loop, and obviously the roguelike element brings variety to how you play the game so that no run is ever the same. The problem with these narrative games is once you've completed it, that's it. You know, consider a recent 10 out of 10 game lauded by games journalists worldwide, which is of course Mixtape, which was essentially a game that plenty of people showed online that you didn't even pretty much need a controller to play, because the game literally just plays itself. Apparently that game is worth a 10 out of 10 review. I'm not going to dwell too much on that, but it really illustrates the disconnect between not just the studios and players, but the greater industry as a whole. Because people in the industry seem to think that they're producing movies, they're producing games. They are not the same thing. They're not even remotely close to being to each other. The point of if you want to sell a movie, you better have a great story first and foremost. People will forgive dodgy visuals and pretty basic audio if the story itself and the message is memorable and it sits with you. But those are movies. Those are not games. The purpose of a game is to, like I said before, you create an enjoyable game loop. It's fun to play, has replayability, and can scale out so that people get plenty of time and, you know, essentially time and enjoyment and fulfillment out of playing it. And then how do you make that enjoyable and how do you sell that? Well, you add the window dressing. So you do a decent story. If you're a game that a story is going to fit, potentially a shooter or a single player game is obviously the ones that we're thinking of in this regard. You don't really need stories in multiplayer online shooters, but they still have it to an element to some degree. And then, of course, outside of the story, you need graphics, you need sounds, you need stimulation for the player to immerse themselves in the game and feel like they're getting that little bit of dopamine hit and that escapism. So when you fire up a game that you want to play, and that game is literally just push forward the walk and have a whole bunch of people talking at you for half the game, like I said, that does appeal to some people. There will always be an audience for this type of stuff, and if you're a person that enjoys that kind of thing, how to you. You know, I'm not saying narrative games are bad, but what I am saying, you're not the majority of people who play computer games. The majority of people who play computer games play it because they want to play games, they want to play things that they can fully immerse themselves in, but actually get some challenge out of, you know, a lot of gameplay. They learn, you know, think of a game like if you're playing a single player like Elden Ring, you know, learning the boss moves, you know, exploring the world, you know, finding hidden rooms, those sorts of things, you know, doing a build on your character, you know, all these things that you seem to lock into. So looking at numbers, you know, playing games like Path of Exile, you know, has an interesting story as well, but this is all extras to complement the entire gaming experience and not the whole point of them. And the problem is with these gaming studios, they've lost sight of that fact. And back to the point of Senua and Ninja Theory is when they were acquired by Xbox in years gone past, they said they wanted to be a prestige, you know, gaming studio that delivered these experiences. Now, I get it. You get all sorts of people coming to the gaming industry, especially in probably the last 15 years. But even then, their decision to do that in games that people aren't really interested in playing is an interesting choice indeed. The AAA scene itself seems to be suffering from this disease that I mentioned at the start of going overly far into narrative-driven games without delivering upon gameplay promises. And like I said earlier, it is somewhat self-indulgent to me that they kind of feel like you've got to eat the slop. And it is slop. Like, it is produced quite well, but it's not a game. Okay, these aren't games, they're stories that they're making. That's fine, there's a market for it, but it's very small. So don't be surprised when you start losing hundreds of millions of dollars and have to start shutting studios down, because the day of reckoning is here right now. But it's interesting because obviously indie studios predominantly seem to have avoided this because they simply understand what it takes to make a good game. That is gameplay, having a graphical theme, you know, or an attractive theme that players can identify as their game and not just a Unreal Engine 5 product demo like some of these AAA games are becoming. Don't get me wrong, they look amazing, but they look boring, to be honest. Essentially, it's been up to the indie scene to remember what games are about while still delivering on the promise of telling good stories. Good stories are important in gaming. They are the glue that holds, especially single-player stories together and games together, but they are the cherry on top and not the point of it. The narrative story needs to complement the gameplay, not be the point of the game to begin with. If Skyrim was a walking simulator and you didn't have all the freedom you have as a player, it would not be as popular as it is today. We saw that with Starfield when they went the other way with that as well. Not enough freedom for the player to be able to determine their own destiny in that style of game. And when you railroad and make things so incredibly linear to the point where a player doesn't have to make any choices, barely has to push any buttons, that's okay for a very small audience, but it's not okay for the greater gaming industry as a whole. It's not what we play games for.